Once again, overwhelming group and interest and number of colleagues who are there. I'm very happy. My name is Amir Parasta. I work in Munich at Munich Eye, and mainly, I have to say, both in the cataract world and in the refractive world, but more refractive. That means my patients actually come to us is a new class to gain more or less freedom from glasses somewhere. What I'm going to tell you a little bit about today is a new class of lenses, I would almost like to say. The last time at the DOC was here, about the hybrid lens that is the HumanOptics Triva, that all three worlds are virtually united. Monofocal in the outer zone, diffractive in the intermediate zone, and in the middle. Also isofocal. And that's still the lens I offer the most. What has changed compared to last year? I recommend it to a lot more patients because I was a bit reluctant to. Because everyone who comes from the diffractive world thinks of higher pupil size, cord M, calluses, these are all quasi-exclusion criteria. And then with such a lens that comes into a new class, of course, after being careful so slowly again and again, braver and thinks, okay, maybe I can do it here too. And in the meantime, I have to say, I am amazed at how many patients actually have to deal with this hybrid optics. Very well. But there are still patients who I can't afford to deal with. Hybrid P optics, or that the patients do not want it. Reasons can be different. And there you have had the choice until now, between a classic monofocal lens and a so-called EDOF lens. What does EDOF mean? EDOF does not describe at all how a lens is constructed, and says nothing at all about the optical design of the lens. EDOF is simply called enhanced depth of focus, i.e., only the point of focus is drawn from one point. On a stick. That is, if you have a ballpoint pen from the front. A ballpoint pen is always a point. If you turn the ballpoint pen 90 degrees, that's a line. Accordingly, EDOF means only that several focus points in a row are structured accordingly and basically. If you have a normal spherical lens, monofocal spherical lens, with 32 diopters, you already have an EDOF lens. Because this lens is so spherical, that it has a certain elongation of the optics by nature. They all know the experience. They enlighten him. They get a monofocal lens. You will definitely need reading glasses. Then he comes after the operation, says, I don't need it at all. Although he has a monofocal lens, he just uses... If it also has a very steep cornea, it has two strong spheres, one after the other, and due to the strong spheres, it has an EDOF effect by itself. It doesn't need an EDOF lens at all. Conversely, if you have a patient with a very shallow calluses, i.e. assumed 4140, so the beautiful green pictures, then you know he has no pseudo-accommodation. And these are especially patients who have a plus, can benefit very well from the sphere. Yes, but now, how do I bring in plus an orb without ending up in an incorrect refraction? He needs a 28 lens or 24 lens. So I prefer to give him a 25 lens. Yes, then he doesn't see anything in the distance. This means that you can't play with this game indefinitely. That's why it's a visual challenge to take part in the far from a lens not to change anything, but still to bring in a so-called pseudo-accommodation. Speaking in pictures, to make a line out of a point without the point moving. Yes, I don't want the point to go back and forward, but I just want him to get a tail. Yes, that's what it's all about. And that's all science. This means that all optical designs try to get this tail. And ideally, they get a tail, which is actually a bit to the back and doesn't give a cross at the back, and scattered light that tilts, etc. If you use diffractive optics rings, you always have the problem that you are causing stray light with it. But if they only want to pull back one point, so to speak, this is only possible by not adding any additional geometry to the optics, like rings, prisms, or anything else. This means that you can actually only play with the curvature, with the sphericity of the lens, and without having to The basic strength of the lens distance changed accordingly. No matter what the patient tells you beforehand, he is only satisfied if his distance is satisfied. But afterwards, of course, he wants to have the distance. That's why it's always important to check with a new lens first, what the performance is like in the distance. And now let's take a look at this new class. I call it comfort class in my practice, because we distinguish between simple, monofocal lens, comfort class, and hybrid lenses. So I don't even go into optical design for my patients. They didn't study optics or medicine. Diffractive monofocal lens, what should he do with it? He wants to know the function, and that is, so to speak, the nomenclature we use. And finally, with the ASPIRA Plus, we have already the gigantically proven ASPIRA technology. I have to say, I have the lens. It wasn't called ASPIRA yet. It was called different, had a cryptic name with 3 letters. On it, 2 letters, 2 numbers on it, and I've already implanted them. By the way, bracket on, I also implanted as a sulcus lens, because I've been working for at least 20 years. Who put in the sulcus has never had a problem with it. Clamp on, clamp close, that's not as a sulcus lens, is off-label, but I have the best experience. This is my best sulcus lens I have if the capsule ruptures. And there we have the ASPIRA, so to speak, and a small modification. What has changed so much? Almost nothing. That's the beauty of it. That is the good news. We still have the ASPIRA optics with 6mm optics. We continue to have the 12mm haptics, why it becomes sulcus capable for me. And we have a really minimal visual change in the middle. That means we have a small bend. That's not always a wave, but you can actually say, if you marry spherical optics with aspherical optics, you have the ASPIRA Plus. You can actually say that. Very aspherical in the outer zone. In the middle, it has gained in sphericity. That is, you take them so that you can imagine it in the picture. You take a spherical ASPIRA, there is no spherical one, but a spherical lens. Yes, and put them in a shrink machine. And shrink the optics from 6mm to 2.5. And the other lens, then take the aspherical, punch the 2.5 in and put the other one in there. Then you have the ASPIRA Plus. This is nothing else. It is not a change in sphericity, not an addition. It's just a game between sphericity and asphericity, so to speak. And now it is like this. You're going to have a lot of lenses on the market that say, oh yes, there we have played with the sphericity so much that we produce scattered light. So we would have to create a transition zone of very much negative sphericity so that we can catch the scattered light again. That means you then have a wave look in the middle, so to speak. And that's what you all write in the brochure with wave front optics. Sounds totally brilliant, optically quite a mess. Because of course I produce an insane amount of scattered light with it. And with that, I lose what I have in the effective light. And I would like to show you that briefly. In short, the image quality is very, very close to normal optics. It has an extended depth of field, is still monoblock acrylic like the aspherical ASPIRA. And by the fact that you have this interplay, which you have chosen a wide zone, is also a very high decentering tolerance. Both against decentering through capsule shrinkage, as well as to chord M, i.e. inherently decentered pupil. Not all of us have our pupil in the middle. There are legal entities, left carrier, top carrier, bottom carrier, and accordingly, you also have the important tolerance that a lens must have. And she brings it with her. And here you see, and this is short for me, so to speak, one of the most important characteristic curves of a lens. The one I look at my new lens is the MTF distribution. What does it tell us? Please do not confuse it with defocus curves. This has little to do with diopters and range. This curve does not say where the lens deforms what. But basically, I'm only interested in the top of an MTF curve. That means you always look there because I want to know how much actual high-performance light the lens provides. Ideally, a lens would bring an MTF of 1.0. This is not visual acuity 1 pa, but let's translate it into 100% light. If we reduce the whole thing, so to speak, their natural lens does not bring 100% by any means. Don't expect it at all. There is no lens that has an MTF 100% in nature. That would be a very strange lens, so to speak. That means we have a lens that is now available here at ASPIRA. That's the blue curve without modulation comes to 0.8. This is already a very good value from the monofocal lens. And even monofocal lenses are not comparable with each other. You will find manufacturers who do not use yellow lentils at all, because when they notice when I also see yellow in my half-good optics, then the MTF crashes into me. Now you will, how does the patient notice MTF? I translate the function in the sentence. I see great. But when I'm sitting in the car and traffic signs, I recognize them much later. Do you see them out of focus? No, I'll recognize them later. I have to get closer until I see this. So this has to do with the speed of recognition and not with the selectivity of a lens. And that's what the MTF tells you. The first EDOF lenses to hit the market that were spherical and had this wave optics and really like a bomb in the market 5 years ago have had an MTF curve stopping at 0.3. Of course, the patient sees 1.0. Of course, he is around without glasses. And of course, he is dissatisfied when driving. Why? Because visual acuity is not only a decimal recognition value, visual acuity is also light efficiency. And if I have to get very close until I see the light, then I'll translate that in this MTF. That's why you should always look at a lens and demand from every manufacturer that it shows you an MTF curve. And a little trick, and here HumanOptics is extremely honest as always. Here you can see the diopters below. If you now have a focused eye on the brochures, you often have MTF curve without diopter specification. A plus 30 was then measured. Yes, this has little to do with your patients. If you make the same MTF curve with a plus 6, then the best lens in the world does not reach 0.8, because there is little lens, little light focusing. Logical. How is a 6-diopter lens supposed to focus as much light as a 30mm lens? So that's very important. And you can see here in distinction between ASPIRA and ASPIRA Plus that we hardly write MTF. We're still at 0.7, and that's a gigantic value that I really know from very few lens manufacturers. Now the lens manufacturer can go and say, I style my lens so that I get to 0.8 despite EDOF. What happens then? This curve is getting narrower and narrower. That is, the more you grow the lens on MTF, the less tolerant it becomes to residual refractions. That means you breed a cow. Even at half a diopter, their visual acuity collapses. That means you can't play the game indefinitely. I don't look at any manufacturer here in the absolute eye who has done it to perfection and only then learned. So, not everything. MTF is the best in the world. So, you can go higher, but it's just getting narrower. You have to know that. And here, too, HumanOptics is actually taking a very, very, very good path. Now it's about defocus, which means that this is about diopter variance. How much pseudo-accommodation have I gained? And now you will be surprised. I was so free and have cut off the curve at the bottom because we are interested now at the bottom, not what is happening there, but what interests us, the top corner of the curve. This means that we already have the ASPIRA without plus, already a distribution. This also means that it is actually something EDOF. And the colleagues who use an ASPIRA have often wondered why the patient with a monofocal lens shows an intermediate visual acuity. You will find this in every patient with a steep cornea and more than 22 diopters in the eye. They are already on the road in the EDOF. With the standard monofocal lens, he is already in the EDOF range, and that is now even more broadly shouldered. I have now simply changed it to decimal vision. I rebuilt their curves a bit. When I look at the decimal visual acuity here, then I still reach 0.8 to about 2 diopters. And some multifocal lenses don't do that for them. Yes, that means we are in the area where we actually have similar performance to a multifocal lens. But beware, I wouldn't educate my patients. Say they get a multifocal lens for one-third as much. By definition, this is a monofocal plus lens. How much it performs depends on the steepness of the cornea. Do you have a patient with a steep cornea and you are ASPIRA plus behind it, you can save yourself the multifocal lens. If you have a flat cornea and you put the ASPIRA plus behind it, then you can give him the 67 centimeters, his computer and laptop promise, but quasi. Ride more in low light and so on, and he definitely needs glasses. We are still in the monofocal plus range, but the ASPIRA plus will surprise you positively because that's just the area where we do. And my motto is to promise less and less, to keep more. Vision consists of 30%, optics 70% workmanship. We always have smart eyes, but not always smart brains behind them. So unfortunately, you can't measure that in advance. Such a cerebral visual acuity. There you can simulate with your IV device with the stimulator, and here, may I use the kind permission of Professor Ascension from David J. Apple Lab, which actually uses the lens in the aftermath of a subjective perception accordingly with patients. With this setup, the lens is simply plugged in, so to speak, and you can see the visual impression accordingly in the patient. Of course, the measurement has a bias. The patient still has his own lens in there. That means we look through two lenses. That means it is important how thick its lens is, how steep it is his cornea. That also plays a role. That's why you can use it. Not just say with one measurement, but here are 9 measurements. Because then you have the chance that you can sometimes use a flat cornea, even patients, with a different refraction, and accordingly can correct it better. And what you see here, you can see the ASPIRA on the page, standard, and here you can see the ASPIRA plus. The fact that we have this broad positioning, this is the logmar curve, i.e. 0.8 to 1 type 1.7. This means that this corresponds to an addition from nominal 1 to functional to 2.8, depending on what the cornea is like. And that's gigantic. Well, that means we actually have the theoretical defocus curves, which have been measured on the optical bench with a sensor, on the patient with a RALF, be able to trace 1 to 1. This means that the lens holds that, which it actually promises from the physical concept. Well, it's always... So if you fiddle with the optics a bit, you get a bit of stray light. That's why you have to look at it, of course, and then again. The juxtaposition. I think it's an extremely unfair comparison that you compare this with the ASPIRA. I think it's better in terms of marketing if you compare an ASPIRA Plus with a multifocal lens. And then you can actually see where the journey can go. But now a benchmark for an ASPIRA that has no scattered lights at all. You can see that it still looks good. So she also survives this test quite well. And if you compare the scatter bars with each other, then you will see a large amount of overlap. This means that we have many patients who have just as much stray light with an ASPIRA than with an ASPIRA Plus. And the topics are not in the disturbing areas, not in streaks, not in starbursts, and not really in halos, but they have a little more glare. And we know from physiology when the brain is exposed to a scattered light, can P-calculate well and can calculate away well, then that's glare. That is, we load the system with our little optical trick, exactly in the field, where the brain can help us the most and can accommodate us. Exactly for decentering. Of course, this was also looked at to see which area we were getting into. And we see here, this is so that the clinical user knows, where can I expect a cord to become an issue for me? New biometric devices all indicate pupil centricity. And if you now take this from the theoretical concept and looks at it from the optical bench, then you can actually see on both sides up to 0.4 no big drop. Equivalent to 400 microns cord M. And that's the golden rule. All patients who have cord M up to 400 microns, you can promise freedom from glasses. All patients who have more than 400 cord ME, you can't promise freedom from glasses. Thank God these are rare cases, but they are there. These are the patients who are suffering from incorrect refraction. that do well with emmetropia, and yet they don't see and are dissatisfied. These are cord med patients over 400, and I would be cautious about that. Already in the Enlightenment say, they simply have a decentered pupil. No matter what I put in there, they won't see so well, as with the lens that the good Lord has made for them, because her lens and pupil were born together. Her pupil and my lens are not born together. Therefore, a mistake could break apart with a parallax. Accordingly, this is what you need to know. There, they have the limit and usually the only one from my point of view. So when you see the IFU, the package inserts of the lenses, there is no single contraindication more than the monofocal lens. That means there, where you can use the ASPIRA, you can also use the ASPIRA Plus. But with a distinction, of course. Where can I promise freedom from glasses in advance? Of course, I can only do that if the cornea fits. Of course, I can see a patient with keratoconus. Do not put ASPIRA in, and important to know, the ASPIRA Plus is not yet available directly. Hopefully it will be soon, but at the moment it is not available. That is, if you have corneal astigmatism above 0.7, better go on a Tarica or another lens first, and not to an ASPIRA Plus. These are the two cases I would give you. Cord M over 400, astigmatism over 0.7. You are welcome to do everything else with it. If you have any questions, if you want to exchange experiences, if you have had the lens implanted and would like to know, there is an issue, how can I deal with it? There's my email address, please anytime. I am looking forward to the exchange of colleagues. I am at your disposal.